Hello, and welcome to the ILTV News Podcast. I'm Executive Editor Maayan Hoffman, and I'm welcoming back our viewers and our listeners. Today we have a very interesting guest, a senior correspondent for Newsmax. We're going to welcome John Huddy. Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, John, you have been back and forth from Israel for a while now. And when you wake up here, I'm just wondering, what is one of those first things that hits you that you say, wow, I am not in the U.S. anymore?
Well, I would say there's a lot that reminds me of the United States because there's so many Americans that are here, particularly this time of year during the summer, and there's so much cultural influence. And in the United States, too, where I live in Boca Raton, I joke it's like an Israeli settlement. So basically all my friends are Israeli. So I come here and I see the American influence, the culture, the stores. Obviously it's the things that stand out, the language, of course. I know a little bit of Hebrew, but not a lot. But most people understand English, so it's not hard to get around. But for me, every time I come to Israel, when I first came to Israel in 2014, what stood out, one was it was very hot because it was June. Wasn't used to that, but also the signs, the blue signs in English, Hebrew, Arabic. That's obviously a huge change. But for me now coming here, as much as I have, it is truly like coming home. There's so much American influence and, that cultural influence as well. So I almost feel like it's like being in America in some areas. It really is.
That's super interesting. Now, how many times have you been here?
Oh, I've lost count.
You've lost count.
I can't even remember. I lived here for 4 years.
Right.
I lived here from 2014 to 2018 in Jerusalem. And since then, I've been back. I wasn't here. After I left in 2018, I was very busy in the U.S., and I didn't come back until October 7th. So I hadn't been back in a few years. But since then, I've been back and forth probably at least half a dozen times.
Oh, unbelievable. Yeah, in such a short period. It's a lot of flying.
And then when I lived here, going back and forth to the United States, I lost count. So much.
Yeah, I guess because of the work that you do. And obviously,
Right.
As you said, you've been here since October 7th because one of the things that you do for Newsmax is really war reporting. And since you've been here just on this trip, you've been into Gaza, one of the few reporters that's had access to the crossings.
Well, I've been to the crossing. Haven't gone in yet.
Okay.
I'm working on it. But I've been down to Kerem Shalom. So I went with Kogat and the IDF, which was kind of a small group of journalists that were taken down right to the crossing where Gazan civilians, men, women, and children, were being brought out, medically evacuated. Oh, wow. So I was part of the group that interviewed some of those folks that were coming out of Gaza. But I've been to Gaza back and forth quite a bit. In 2014, when I first came to Israel, I landed here, and 2.5 weeks after I got to Israel, the war, Operation Protective Edge, started. Oh, wow. So I found myself, never been to Israel, never been to the region, was in Jerusalem for about 2 weeks. 2.5 weeks later, I was stepping across the Arrows Crossing, and I was in Gaza for 3 weeks. So it was a very intensive education about the region. And I'd been back and forth between Israel and Gaza several times over the course of about 1.5 2 years, from 2014, 2015. But then after October 7th, in late October, I was taken with the IDF, with Special Forces, into Gaza to see the humanitarian corridor. I was the only U.S. journalist on that trip to be taken with a small group. I think there were 2 or 3 other journalists with IDF Special Forces, and we were the first ones to see the humanitarian corridor, so along Salah ad-Din from the north to the south. I think that was October 23rd of 2023, if my memory serves me. So that was, that was obviously a very intensive trip, very eye-opening. But this trip, we went down to Kerem Shalom. So we were right on the border. And I've been on the border multiple times over the last couple years since October 7th.
Inside on the Gaza side, now what struck you as really, what stood out? What was different from what you saw at Kerem Shalom versus, let's say, that humanitarian corridor that you saw 1.5 years ago? Did it feel calm in Gaza?
Well, there was certainly less military action, this trip. You heard a little bit of what sounded like some machine gun fire. But it wasn't even close to the intensity post October 7th. And then even in, when was it, March or May, when Israel and the IDF launched the offensive in Rafah, I was down on the border. I was down right there on the border for the start of that. And there was I have a picture where you see like 6 explosions in the different distance. I'm standing on kind of that main highway, and you see the heavy military activity. So yes, comparatively, over the last year, the last 7 months, sure, there was a noticeable change. But, I saw the IDF still has its staging areas there. Sure. I won't say where, it's not hard to figure that out. I think we all know. But, the IDF has its staging areas. There still is, you see the IDF troops in and out. But I will say being on the border there, being on the crossing, compared to when I was down there, I wasn't wearing that day. I wasn't wearing any body armor. I didn't feel that it was too unsafe where I needed to put my Kevlar helmet and my flak jacket on. And really, that's because there were not, at that moment, any direct threats. And this is about a week ago, right?
Yeah. I think you and I were actually down there on the same day. I went to Kerem Shalom last Wednesday, right? I think
I wish we would have timed it. I would have stuck around.
Have, hung out,
Well, I was debating whether to do my live shot there or start heading back to Jerusalem because it was going to take some time. Yeah. So I wish I would have known. I would have stayed there. And
could have gotten a drink on the way back.
Could have had some coffee and,
there you go.
Swapped war stories.
100%. So, from what you know and what you're hearing from both sides of the borders, do you feel that Israel is achieving its goals in this war?
Oh, yeah. See, that's the question, isn't it? If achieving its goals, if destroying Hamas, getting the hostages back, that was the goal, right? So in that sense, no. To be perfectly honest, no, I don't think the IDF has achieved its goal.
You think Hamas is equally as strong as it was before?
No, I don't think Hamas is equally as strong. I think Hamas's leadership has been decimated, obviously, with the death of Mohammed Deif and Yahya Sinwar, of course. But Hamas still has, an estimated 20,000 terrorists in Gaza. So it still has a presence. It still has that grip on the people, along with other terrorist factions, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and now all these warring factions, right, and the clans that are fighting, particularly in the south. I think what the IDF is contending with now, and this is coming from Effie Defrin, the IDF spokesperson who I interviewed last week, is guerrilla warfare. That's what they're contending with. Right. Does Hamas have the strength that it did before? No. So in that sense, the IDF did achieve its objective of degrading Hamas's military capabilities.
Right, they're destroying and not degrading was actually the goal, as you mentioned.
But I think that the harder part of this is, and this goes back to a question that I asked Mickey Edelstein, and this was after myself, and I don't know if you were part of this group, but in October of 2023, I was part of the media that was brought in to see the Hamas raw body cam footage. I think you may have seen it.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was part of the big group that was brought to the base.
Were you on that first day?
Yeah. So we saw that, and Hagari, who was the IDF spokes at the time, gave kind of a preview speech, about the goals, the objectives, about Hamas and what Hamas was doing that day. And then we saw the 43 excruciating minutes of that. And then Mickey Edelstein, Brigadier General, I believe, spoke. And the question I asked him was, okay, so the IDF has been clear about its objective to destroy Hamas, but how do you destroy the radical Islamist philosophy and mentality that led to the formation of this terrorist group and organization and military, army, really, that it's become? How do you destroy that?
What was his answer?
That's a question about the future. I really can't answer that, but we are continuing our... it was a very diplomatic answer.
Very diplomatic answer. That's nice, yeah.
To me, I think that the road ahead, among the many other different challenges, that's going to be a tremendous challenge. How do you destroy that mentality? How do you destroy what is in the DNA even, in the character of people, of that 11-year-old whose dad and brother and cousins were Hamas and fought and were killed. How do you destroy that? How do you degrade that? I don't know if you can.
Well, I think it takes generations, right? This is really, I mean, it's interesting that you touch on that because I think, people get called out very negatively and very appropriately for saying, well, all of Gaza is Hamas. And it's not. There are obviously civilians living in Gaza. On the other hand, when you've been under 20 years of Hamas rule, you're obviously indoctrinated, as you said, into the Hamas ideology. So how do you break that ideology? Because even a civilian certainly was raised to respect Hamas, exactly as you said.
Well, when people say, Gaza is Hamas, Hamas is Gaza, it's in the sense of, and I think you would agree with this, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in the sense of Hamas running the government, Hamas, running the military
and running
aspects,
the schools,
and running the schools, and overseeing and having control of UNRWA and and the aid. So in that sense, and that's something that I saw in 2014 that really is still vivid in my mind, were the billboards of the young cubs, the young lions, and like a 10-year-old, right, like holding the AK with the Hamas insignia and everything. I mean, they had that vice grip on, they really subjugated the people, and when I went back in 2015 after Operation Protective Edge, I remember going into Sajaiya, and this was an area that we were allowed to go in for the first humanitarian ceasefire back then, and literally Hamas fighters were coming from the front lines, shell-shocked, that 1,000-yard stare, and everybody was yelling cameras down. People were coming out of the buildings. I saw the body of a child. And I went back. There was just destruction. I went back a year later, and there was a house, and what kind of stood out to me back then as I talked about the children's clothing hanging on the clothing line. And I don't know what happened to the people in that house. I went back a year later. Turns out they fled, and they all survived, a family of 7 people. And they invited me in for tea, and we had this exact conversation about, and they didn't tell me on camera, but many people told me off camera, look, we are under the grip of Hamas. Right. We would like to live in peace, but we are run by Hamas, and that was the harsh reality then, and the harsh reality now, though I know the IDF in Israel is trying, as the Prime Minister said, not to annex Gaza, but to free it from Hamas. Right. But I think you're not only talking about Hamas, you're talking about other terrorist factions. And what concerns me is possibly the power vacuum that's left open. What happens after Hamas goes away? Who controls it? An Arab transitional governing body? Run by who?
Exactly.
Right?
It's such a big question. Point number 5 of the 5 points, right, that Netanyahu rolled out is the civilian administration. And
correct.
Speaking of that plan, the big thrust of that plan, of course, is the more military occupation of the Gaza Strip. John, do you think that that's viable, that the IDF can go in and can actually, quote unquote, occupy Gaza or most of Gaza for a period of time? Or is this just like a disaster waiting to happen diplomatically and otherwise?
That's a great question. I think that I'm very wary about when timetables are given of 5 months, a 5-month operation. Well, wasn't that supposed to be the case on October 8th?
And here we are 22 months later.
What happened to that? What happened? We're going to destroy Hamas. Well, no, it didn't. It's easier said than done. Yeah. But there's so many complications with that, right? They're so ingrained. They're so entrenched in Gaza. And that was very clear to me, to you, to others after 2014. In 2021, what stood out during the 13 days of fighting was how they really enhanced their rocket capabilities, the trajectory and the distance capabilities of their rockets. And I said, this is a terrorist organization that's not become more moderate.
Right.
As Yahya Sinwar wanted the international press to believe, and they bought it hook, line, and sinker. This is a terrorist organization that's becoming more dangerous, more lethal, more vicious. And that was clear. They enhanced their terrorist, their military capabilities, and their military objectives, clearly. So to your question, when I'm hearing these timelines, I don't put much faith in that. I think it's going to be a lot harder because they're so entrenched above ground and also below ground. Right. They have military fortifications that they've been working on for 20 plus years, right? So I don't think it's going to be as easy as sending in say it's 5 divisions to go in and light up Gaza City, get people out of there and the central camps. I think this is going to be a lot more difficult.
5 months could become 5 years. Yeah, could become a real occupation.
And it's not only Israel. It's not like Israel just has one battlefront. You know, the prime minister has talked about a 7-front fight.
Right.
Okay, well, you know, things in southern Lebanon, obviously they've degraded, if not destroyed. Yeah. Hezbollah, though, Hezbollah still has some military capabilities, but not even close. Right. You know, then you have what's happening in Syria.
Good deal.
Who knows where that's going to go with al-Shara. But then, more importantly, you have the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, the Palestinian territories. Yeah. You know, and terrorist factions are entrenched there as well. So it's not as simple. And then, of course, the Houthis in Yemen. And then what I've said and what I asked the prime minister in his press conference Sunday, the 8th front, the propaganda war, the information war that's raging. That's a whole other front that Israel's having a hard time with right now. And that even the prime minister said, no, I don't think we're winning this, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the killing of the journalist from Al Jazeera and the response from the international media has been striking. Israel has even rolled out more evidence than it normally does to prove that this guy was 100% tied to Hamas, and yet people are believing that this is, you know, somebody who was assassinated from the press. And I think even more so, people aren't paying attention to the idea of resistance journalists. That's what they call them. Hamas sees journalism, journalists, and press or influencers as part of the battlefield. They're using these people to achieve these goals.
Well, when I saw, so this was literally, I was at the press conference with the foreign press on Sunday.
I saw you ask a question. I was watching.
I asked about the information war because when I came back this trip, this is the question that I've been asking the IDF is, what are you guys doing to counter this? You need to take journalists into Gaza. I know everybody's banging their hands on the table, and they even I think a Sky News reporter, if I'm not mistaken, asked the question about bringing journalists in, and even the prime minister said he's put out a directive. Right. Okay, but when's that going to happen? I've been asking the IDF.
Well, and also those are dog and pony shows. I mean, I think one of the things, I'm a member of the Foreign Press Association here as well, in addition to these roles. And, I'm watching the groups. There's a court case and there's they've been really trying to push. But I think, first of all, it was a security issue for a long time. But now, as you mentioned, things have calmed down. But they don't want to give free access. So, just, saying that they've asked the IDF to bring in foreign press doesn't mean the foreign press will have access to see what they really want to see. It means that they're going to see what the IDF wants them to see, and that's the point of contention.
Well, what they're going to see is destruction, and I think that's a bad look. Obviously, there's going to be destruction, and that's why the prime minister is kind of teeing that up with, well, there's going to be there is destruction because Hamas was booby-trapping buildings, and yes, that's true, but also, as part of combat engineering, destroying the tunnels, you're talking about neighborhoods that are getting destroyed as well because the tunnels are built under the neighborhood.
60+% of Gaza is completely uninhabitable.
Right, and so obviously that's not a good look for the IDF. But getting back to the death, to the strike that killed 7 people, including the reported 5 journalists. So the prime minister has that press conference. The main goal of that, to counter the false narratives, to puncture the lies and the narratives, right? The false narratives. Okay, I get that. And it's funny because the week before, that's what I was talking to the IDF about. Now, I'm not saying John Huddy of Newsmax, they got back to him and he's like, I better do something because John Huddy of Newsmax is asking this question, but it was literally the question is, how are you countering this media narrative? Like, you guys are getting hammered right now. Yep. And this is a big reason why. So, and it was part, look, I'm trying to get embeds too. So, I got a vested interest in this. But so he has that presser, and then literally, the next morning, I'm seeing the headline about 7 people killed, including 5 journalists, and I'm going, "Oh my goodness! Like you're hurting. It's just you're completely doing the contrast of what you're trying to do here. Yeah. Is get public opinion on your side, but then this is happening now. Albeit, Anas al-Sharif, the journalist you're talking about, clearly he was Hamas. Yeah. He was involved with Hamas. He had selfies with Sinwar. And I mean, unless it's AI generated, I don't think so. But he was already known to the IDF. Yeah. Right?
No, they talked about him a year ago. They
talked about him a year ago. It's not the first time. All of these guys, and that's the thing. There's all the connection to Hamas. I saw that. When I was there, my fixers, They were all connected to Hamas. I know that.
Well, Hamas runs everything. As we said, Hamas also runs the media.
Hamas runs everything. Hamas subjugates the people. The other thing I should mention, when I went back in 2015 and there was rebuilding going on, what I noticed and what struck me was that you would have, say, a neighborhood block that was really damaged during the fighting back then, during Operation Protective Edge. You would have like 2 or 3 buildings that were still rebar and kind of blown out, and then 2 beautiful buildings built. And I said, well, who lives in those buildings? Hamas. Hamas leadership, Hamas military commanders.
It's crazy.
That's how it was there. And that's how it continues to be, clearly.
So let me take you back to Netanyahu for a minute. You know,
Sure.
He's been leading this war for the last 22 months by and large. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I mean, you've been covering Israel, as you said, for a very long time. Do you think Netanyahu is doing a good job? And do you believe he's doing this for the best for Israel, or is this politically motivated?
See, we've had this conversation, I know, and I've had this conversation with everybody since I've been on the ground here, because it is the question,
Well,
right?
share it with our viewers.
And I know many people feel he's just trying to retain the grip on power so he doesn't go to jail and all this. I don't necessarily believe that. I don't agree with that. Mm-hmm. I think that there's obviously a lot of division in the country, politically and militarily, about the functioning of the government, about Bibi's control of the ongoing war and the military operations, his involvement. I know there's a lot of concern and contention about the decisions by the political echelon that are being made with him at the very top. Me personally, I've always liked Netanyahu. I think he's smart. I think he's tough. I think he's always represented Israel. But I understand the concerns. The question is, who can step into that role?
Right.
Who can manage this, right? Who can lead Israel to a point of completing the objectives? And I know there's been a lot of concern about whether this war has been properly managed and run.
Right.
But this is a war unlike any. Israel did not expect a prolonged war here, but that's what it is, and Hamas is so entrenched, as we talk about. So to your question, look, it's a valid question. It's a reasonable question. I know I'm kind of deflecting a little bit here.
No, you're a journalist, so you know how to do that.
Well, yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I know, there's been mass protests, large demonstrations about the way this war has continued and how long it's been without getting those hostages back, and people asking, was it really about the hostages anymore, or is it just about your political ambitions, keeping power and the influences around you, pushing you in this direction or that direction? I think they're all legitimate, valid questions.
Yeah, but we just don't know the answers.
I don't know the
we'll
answer.
find
I can't tell you the answer to that.
Yeah.
Do I think that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't care about the hostages? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah.
I think his detractors have political ambitions too.
Yeah.
But I don't think. I think that ultimately they want to get the hostages back, but at the same time, you have to do it in a way that you are completing your goals of destroying Hamas and protecting the security of Israel. If that can be done, I don't know if it can be. I really don't, and I don't think it's going to be done in 4 months.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to. I know the plan is to, by October 7th, get 1 million people, right? Some million people out of Gaza City in those central camps.
Yeah.
I mean, that on its own is going to be very, very difficult, right? And then what happens at that point? If there's not, say, even in that period of time, right? If there's not a ceasefire or talks don't, I don't think they will.
Yeah.
I have never been one over covering this the course of the last couple of years to believe that they'll. I know in November of 2023 there was the exchange, but I just didn't feel that Hamas would release all those hostages.
Of course not. It's their only leverage.
I never believed that would happen, and I hate to say it, I wasn't a strong believer these ceasefire talks would ultimately result in end to the war. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But is this just going to be clean up the mess and get rid of it? No, I don't. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult than that.
For sure. Now, I mean, you're working with Newsmax. Newsmax tends to be a very pro-Israel outlet. Israel's pretty isolated today, and in the media, I would say Newsmax is an anomaly. There's very few pro-Israel media outlets left today in the Western world. Do you ever get pushback from your colleagues, people who are maybe saying they don't respect your work because you're with Newsmax versus, let's say, CNN or MSNBC?
Well, everybody respects my work.
Well, I mean, I do, but
they never say it to my face. But I know what you mean. Look, I've had discussions, intense discussions in the office.
Yeah.
With people who regurgitate what they're hearing from the Tucker Carlsons and the Marjorie Taylor Greens.
Yeah.
And and CNN, or I had somebody in the office talking about Netanyahu, how he's responsible for the war because he was, funding Hamas and allowing Hamas to be funded. And I said, well, okay, so what are your sources? Haaretz and the Washington Post. I said, well,
great sources.
Okay, and we had a pretty intensive discussion, and I've had that discussion. To be honest with you, and I maybe you're kind of leading in this direction, I've lost friends over my position, my personal feeling about Israel. Yeah. Absolutely. And some of my reporting that I try, and I think you know
we
this,
try to be objective always.
I really do. Now, I have a personal connection to Israel, and we can discuss that if you want. My daughter was born in Jerusalem, so I have a deep love and affection for the country. And I always will, right? At one time, I was very critical of Israel until I lived here, until I traveled through the region, until I covered the Palestinian Authority, and I saw for myself what Hamas does to its people, its ambitions towards Israel and other countries, Iran. So my mentality, my feelings shifted over the years. But to your question, has anybody ever disrespected my work? No. Have they questioned whether I'm too close to Israel? Yeah, and I think that's fair. It's a fair question. But as far as the war goes, I have lost friends. Yeah, I've lost relationships, including some very close to me, including family members.
Wow,
including family members, and that I don't speak to anymore. Wow. So in that regards,
it's really a tough job. So we're going to run out of time. I want to ask you just a couple more questions. One is related to U.S. President Donald Trump. Obviously, he took over at the first of the year in the White House, and a lot of the perception of Israel has changed in Washington as a result of the new administration. Do you legitimately believe that Trump has Israel's best interest at heart? Do you think that Trump in this round is good for Israel? Yeah.
Yes, I think, one of the things that stood out, I covered the campaign, I covered the election, I was at the Trump victory party, and even the day after the election and the first week, it was very clear, and he sent, and I reported this, a very strong and clear definitive message that he stands with Israel by bringing on Elise Stefanik, Mike Huckabee, some of the people that are more Zionist than Zionists. They've been said to be. These are very staunchly pro-Israel people, and he was stacking his cabinet and his administration first and foremost with these folks. That was a clear message. We stand with Israel, unequivocally, without debate. Now, will there be disagreements? Of course. I'm sure he and Bibi have had some tough talks.
Well, Bibi's so easy to get along with. I can't imagine.
But and there was some strain on their relationship going back a couple years and everything. But look, Trump obviously. I mean, if anybody says he doesn't support, are you out of your mind? Of course he does. It's a question that I asked him, and he kind of rebuked me in a press conference back on January 7th, and I kind of went after him about, preemptive strike on Iran. I'd be stupid to answer that question. Well, what if Israel were to launch? Are you going to back Israel? And as I said, when the United States hit Iran, he answered that question, very distinctively. Yeah. He answered that question, boy. And we saw the trajectory. I mean, I saw the trajectory going in that direction. And of course, his message was clear. we stand with Israel,
100%.
and we do.
So last question. You're going to go back to the States, I think, in about a week are your
Right.
plans right now. When you get back there, what is the one headline that you want to make sure that the people of America get about Israel? What are you going to be sure that you report or that you bring back with you? Final question, just about it.
Don't believe the false narratives.
Yeah.
Don't believe those false narratives. They're being promulgated, by a lot of the international press, because there always is that critical, that very biased, I believe, opinion towards Israel. So, do your own research, right? And, don't believe those false narratives.
And read Newsmax, I guess, to get the accurate ones.
Newsmax and ILTV.
There you go. Thank you for that as well. That's right.
Else.
Well, John Huddy, senior correspondent for Newsmax, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maayan.